Do you ever remember a time in school when you were told to read something for homework? You read it at home, but when you were asked in class what you read the night before, suddenly it struck you. Your eyes went over the page, but you actually didn't read anything. You just did your time, but didn't process the words on the page. You learned nothing because you didn't actually understand the content. And isn't that just sad? The first angle to understanding the big question in Bible study is knowing the content. It may seem like a no-brainer, but trust me, most Christians are really bad at it. We just glance over the words and begin to construct meaning with our heads in the clouds, all the while so easily missing what's right in front of our faces. But fear not. Like any other skill, examining the content of the Bible with precision can be learned by using a few tools. Now, there are many educational techniques to mastering content, which is essentially understanding what the words on the page actually say, and any educator could teach them better than this silly video could. This is far from comprehensive, and lacks a whole lot of detail. I won't go into the history of the Bible or the nature of Scripture, but there are a few specific tools that are mostly unique to Bible studies that are worth noting. Disclaimer. The assumptions in this video are in line with the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod doctrine of Scripture, so no flame wars here. Please. The first big tool for explaining content is understanding translations. The Bible was originally written in Hebrew, Greek, and some Aramaic. We read it today in our own languages that scholars have translated for us. But for anyone who has ever taken any language classes in school, translation is both an art and a science, and it can be a tricky thing. Because of this, there has basically arisen two categories of translation. On one extreme is the literal translation, where words are chosen with precision from the original with less attention to word order or ease of use. On the other extreme is the paraphrase and/or thought-for-thought style of the original, where the translators attempt to translate the thoughts and flow of the text in easily understood language with less attention to precision. Every translation falls somewhere between these two. The NIV 1984, which most American Protestants use, was an honest attempt at an English translation somewhere in the middle, with vocabulary at around a 7th grade reading level. Other examples include the Living Bible, a paraphrase translation at around the 6th grade vocab level, the King James Version, a more literal translation, but with a very high vocab level, mostly due to its old language, and the English Standard Version, the more literal translation adopted for use by the LCMS officially, which sits at an 8th grade vocab level. As a tool when trying to understand Scripture, try looking at different translations at the same words or phrases. Paraphrase or thought-for-thought translations with lower vocabulary levels are great for ease of personal use, but the beefier, more literal translations are a great resource to getting more meat out of the content when studying the Bible. A second tool that will help you explain what the content says is the word study. A simple and mostly unknown fact about the meaning of words in the Bible is that the best way to understand the gist of what the word says is to look at how that word is used elsewhere in Scripture. So if you are hung up on what a particular word says, try to, instead of grabbing a dictionary or simply Googling the word in English, try to investigate the word elsewhere in Scripture. You don't have to look far. In fact, look for how that same word is used in the verses in and around the one you're studying. Then, if you want to study on that particular word, just keep moving farther and farther away from it in the rest of the Bible. You will then be able to create a larger and clearer picture of the full meaning of that word. How do you do this? Well, it's not that difficult just to look, but there are also concordances, which are the dead tree version of a reference of all that use of that word in the Bible, or you can try an online search engine or computer program to do the same thing. Doing this takes time, but trust me, you'll almost always learn something about the content of the words in the Bible when you do. Another useful tool in the arsenal of understanding the content of the Bible is looking at the footnotes and study notes. You'll find footnotes in most Bibles immediately underneath the written text. These are linked to specific words in the text with a letter or number. It's easy to skip over these when reading, but the footnotes can be useful in several different ways. First, the footnotes help show alternative translations. The The Bible has been translated and copied a lot of times over the thousands of years of its use, and don't worry, its transmission and translation has been ridiculously and painfully precise. Regardless, in the study of different copies over the years, scholars have found some simple transmission differences and alternate translations of some words and phrases, and these are pointed out in the footnotes. Secondly, footnotes can further explain some of the more complex translations from the Greek or Hebrew, which can be very useful when faced with confusing words. The footnotes may also serve as editorial clarifying notes or technical translations, so pay attention to them. You can also find study notes in study Bibles, which is usually located around or under the actual text. Each study Bible has its own bias of study notes, and it's important to remember that these notes are neither holy nor inspired, but can be useful for clarifying the content of the words. These are somewhat helpful in studying and helping you understand the content, quite helpful in helping you understand the context, and especially in the more academic study Bibles, extremely helpful in providing other doctrinal viewpoints on the same text from different confessions of the faith. Be careful, though, to not simply let the explanation in these notes blind you to actual careful study of what the words say. So, there are a few tools for your toolbox for understanding the content of a Bible passage. But what skill do we use to measure how well you are understanding the content? It's explanation. Think about it. It's one thing to have a general idea in your head on the content of something, but you really put your money where your mouth is when you have to explain it to someone else, and even more so when you have to back it up with evidence. According to our trusty rubric, which is really just a chart you can use to better measure where you stand on your ability to do something, with examples, there are two extremes on where you can stand on your ability to explain something. The most uninformed explanations are simply naive ones, where you explain your answer using broad generalizations without referencing the text and/or use incomplete and uninformed thoughts. We've all been there, right? You're asked to explain something and the words just come out and you don't know what you're talking about because you just have to say something and everyone in the room, including you, knows that you're not saying anything and you just keep talking because you panic? Yeah, that's not a good place to be. We don't want our explanations of the content of Scripture to be there, do we? Now, on the other end of the spectrum is a sophisticated explanation, which is a thorough and elegant explanation of your understanding using lots of references from the text and argument backed by evidence. This is a total win scenario. Think of a paper you wrote for school that was so well put that the teacher or professor asked for a copy of it for his or her own records after you handed it in. Oh yeah, that's the kind of sophisticated explanation to the big questions that you're aiming for. Your explanation of what the text says is going to fall somewhere between these two extremes, and when we examine our portfolio answers, we need to have a critical eye on where we actually stand. And we need to be aware that our understanding of the content of Scripture is constantly unfolding throughout our entire lives. If we humbly approach the big questions with this in mind, only then can we improve. And we all want to improve, right?